Hi, everybody. Can everybody who's on the call now see me and hear me? Just let me know in the chat if you can. That would be great. Okay. Looks like you can. Jessica from Cold Lake. Awesome. Wonderful. So we have about 13 of you on right now. We were expecting 20. We had 20 registered, so we may have some more join in the next little while. But we will get started just for the sake of time for all of you that were here right on time. That's wonderful. So today we're going to be talking about stress and intuitive eating. So really interesting topic today. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So just a quick introduction to myself. My name is Madison Walsh. I'm a registered dietitian and have a master's of public health. And I'm a health promotion specialist working at CFB Halifax. So today, like I said, we're talking about intuitive eating mainly and how that relates to stress and relating that back as well to, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, because that's a very relevant topic to us all right now, obviously. So we'll be exploring that topic and how that relates to our everyday lives with this new reality that we have. So we're going to jump to this next slide here. Just a few disclaimers before we get started. I want to point out that the presentation that you're about to view is the intellectual property of the Department of National Defense, so no reproduction or copying of the slides. Don't take videos or photos, please, so that it won't be reproduced. That would be great. Also, just an important note that all of our webinars here are intended for an adult audience. So there's a chance that there may be something said that's of a more sensitive nature intended for adults and not children. So if you are at home working and your kids are running around, then just please use your own parental discretion. This is a nutrition topic today, so it's fairly PG. I wouldn't be too worried about it, but that's your judgment call to make, so please do that. Thirdly, just a note that if anyone shares anything in the chat or elsewhere throughout this video, that we want to respect each other's privacy and not to share any stories or facts about other people outside of this webinar. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded so that others can view it at a later time, or you can go back and watch it again later, and it will be posted on cafconnection.ca. So just keeping that in mind. And I'd love it if you do participate. We're going to have some polls. And of course, the chat's always open, so you can participate, ask questions, make comments throughout as we go. I'll always be checking back at the chat to make sure that everyone is up to speed and doesn't have any questions as we're going along. All right, so just before we get started, again, one more thing. I'd like to do a quick poll for our statistics, and we'll have a few at the end as well. This one is just asking your affiliation with the CAF community. So I'm going to make the poll live now. Now I'm hitting share. It should be live. So if you go next to the chat function, there should be a polls function, and you can let me know what your affiliation is with the CAF. That would be wonderful. Great, okay. Looks like only 87% of you have responded, so please, if you haven't, let me know at some point throughout the presentation. Let me know what your affiliation is. It's completely anonymous. It won't be linked to your name or anything. It's just for our statistics so that we have an idea of who's watching these webinars so that we can make sure we're hitting our target audiences. So that would be really great if you could let me know that. Okay, so now we're going to actually jump into the presentation material. I have lots of really pretty slides and photos for you. So to best allow you to view those, I'm going to now turn off my video so that the photos and the PowerPoint will be larger and you'll be able to better see the photos and words and such. So I'm going to do that. So you won't be able to see my face anymore, but you'll be able to see the slides that I have up here that are at the bottom right now. That in a bigger view. Can everyone just confirm that that worked and everyone is good to go? with the slides? Everyone can see the statistics slide? Perfect, great. Okay, so we'll jump into our material. So we're going to start out talking about all of the different factors that affect our food choices. So there's so many different factors that play a role in when we decide to eat, what we decide to eat, how we decide to eat, who we decide to eat with. There's just so many different contributing factors to these decisions. So we're looking to maybe become a little bit more aware of these factors and learn how to take more control of your choices, your food choices, and those decisions that are being made, and how to eat a little bit more intuitively. Like I said, we're talking a lot about what's known as intuitive eating, and we're going to learn much more about what that means as we go on today with our presentation. So let's talk about the types of factors that can influence eating. They can usually be divided into two main categories. The first one being external cues. So these type of external cues come from triggers in our environment that can be either physical or social. And we'll talk about some examples of those. And then the second one is internal cues. So these are the cues that are coming from within ourselves. So if we dive into the details of the two different types, first we'll talk about external cues. So like I said, it can be either physical or social. When we're looking at the physical environment, it's basically something that's triggered by your surroundings. So some examples, and I tried to make these examples relevant to quarantine life. Let's say maybe a family member is baking in the kitchen and you're having the wonderful smell of freshly baked cookies. That may trigger you to decide to eat a cookie because it smells so good. You also may see a food advertisement while you're working from home on your computer. You might get an email from a restaurant or an advertisement pop up on a website, and that may trigger you to, make a certain food decision for that night for dinner. Or for many of us, we may be working at the kitchen table now instead of at the office. And so being next to the fridge all day or in the kitchen with people coming and going and making themselves snacks may be another trigger for us to make a food decision. Then we have social environment, which is triggered by the interaction with others. So these types of decisions are affected by those that are around you. So for example, maybe the family or the kids decide that they want to order takeout tonight for dinner. That's sort of affecting your food decisions because if they're ordering food, then you're probably going to end up eating what it is that your family has decided to order. Or maybe it's a family member's birthday, they're having a quarantine birthday, and maybe a family member decided to make a cake, so you're going to probably have a piece of that cake because it's a birthday. Or maybe you have chips every time that you watch TV with your spouse or your kids, and that's just a tradition. You always do it. It's kind of robotic. It's affected by that social environment, so that's going to also play a role in your decision making. So hopefully that helps clarify the types of external cues that we're talking about. I see Michael has said that stress makes you hungry. I love that you said that because we're actually now going to jump in to internal cues, and that's very relevant, is the idea of stress. Absolutely. So first, we'll just mention the physiological. So the other type of internal cue that stress wouldn't fall under is physiological. So that type of internal cue is basically just when you feel hungry and your body is sending you a message that it needs energy and it wants you to eat, and you feel that grumbling in your tummy. So that's the physiological internal cue that you should eat something. But the second one, the other type of internal cue, that's where stress and lots of other different types of emotions come in. So in response to a feeling an individual may have, they would possibly be inclined to either eat or in some cases not eat. Some people don't actually get hungry by stress or other emotions. Sometimes they feel that they will eat less under those emotions. So other examples, including stress, can be boredom, which many of us might be experiencing these days, fatigue, anger, depression, anxiety, or loneliness, which is another really relevant one these days. So all of these emotions can and often do lead to certain decisions being made about food choices. So let's focus in on stress. Michael, you really hit the nail on the head with this one, and our topic today obviously has a lot to do with stress. So I'd like to know how you all deal with stress. Michael said that it does make you hungry, so Does anyone else find that it makes them hungry? Are there other ways that you deal with stress besides food? If you are, wanting to share, then please let me know in the chat. I'll also set up a poll here for those that maybe don't want to type. And this one's asking whether or not you use food to help manage stress. So if you want to go and answer that poll as well, I'd love to see what percentage actually does use food. Let's see in the chat, we have, gaming, yeah. A drink, alcoholic drink, yeah, absolutely. That's a really common one for sure. And what do we have here? We've got 70% have said yes, that they use food to help manage stress. A couple of you have said no, that's fine too, absolutely. Lots of people don't find that that's something that they do. But a lot of people do, as we can see here. We've got 73% now have said yes to using food to help manage stress. So I found this little image on Google, which I thought was really, really relevant to what we're talking about today. It's just kind of a funny comic that says stressed is desserts spelled backwards. And you can double check, it actually is. I was kind of surprised to see that myself. And it is true, though, that many people find that when they're stressed, they turn to food. And oftentimes, the food that someone's turning to would be a comfort food, which typically are more often higher in calories or sugar or fat. So typically, these foods do fall under the dessert category. Sometimes they're snack foods or other types of foods, but a big one does tend to be those sweet desserts. And let's see, we have a few other comments in the chat. Someone's saying yes and no, that's totally fair. Budget, chores, drinking, depends on the level of stress, absolutely. We've got someone running and tend to eat more when I'm bored. Yeah, definitely, that can be a really big factor for sure. Do you guys find that they typically do tend to be unhealthy or, the typical unhealthy food choices or foods that are higher in sugar, calories, fat, that type of thing when you're stressed or bored or experiencing those emotions? Looks like we have a couple saying yes. Good, yeah, okay, absolutely. That's perfectly normal, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that. Many, many people experience this, and it's a real life phenomenon, so it's not surprising to see you saying yes because of fatigue. Yeah, for sure. Great. Okay, so when we're looking at stress and eating and making certain food decisions, a term that's often floated around is mindless eating. So mindless eating is what would typically be occurring when we allow either the external or internal cues that we just talked about to kind of take over, and we don't really think much about them or what they're saying or what they mean. And we just end up eating without really thinking about it, whether that's because of a certain emotion or, because you smelled freshly baked cookies and you just wander over and you grab one without thinking about it and without really even maybe enjoying it sometimes. So that's absolutely really a common phenomenon as well. So when we're looking at mindless eating, oftentimes it comes with distractions. So it's better to eat with no distractions so that you can be more focused on what you are eating. So if you're eating while you're completing another task, let's say watching TV is a really common one, then that may in certain cases lead to mindless eating or eating more than you originally intended to. So it's a good idea to stop and think and really be aware of what you're eating and when you're eating and why you're eating it, rather than just multitasking while you're eating it and not being aware of what you're doing. The other factor that plays into mindless eating is portion size. So oftentimes someone may just sit down with, let's say, an entire bag of chips, and before they know it, by the end of the movie, they've eaten the entire bag without really even noticing. So instead, a common suggestion would be to portion out your food as you'd like it right away so that you don't end up eating more than you intended mindlessly. And lastly, another factor is accessibility. So if a food is close to you and easily accessible, you are more likely to reach for it and eat it. So it's a good idea to, just be aware of which types of foods are accessible and which are maybe a little bit less accessible, and possibly trying to make sure that the more nutritious foods are more easily accessible whenever possible. And I see that we have a comment here, eating things with lots of sugar and fat creates endorphins and such. Yeah, so absolutely. There's lots of physiological effects of eating food that tastes good, that we enjoy. And there's definitely going to be certain, chemicals and hormones and reactions that occur in our body as a result of that. And that can really give you that sense of pleasure, and that can lead to you wanting to eat more and more of these types of foods. So that's a really good point as well. Wonderful. Okay. So it's important to note that these types of external and internal eating cues, they're always, always, always going to be present. They're always there. They're always going to be pulling us in one direction or the other, or telling us we should eat this or we should eat that. But what's important is really how we react to them and what we do with them, how we use them, and what choices we end up making despite these different types of competing cues. So the important thing is to always listen to our bodies, and that really leads us well into mindful or intuitive eating, which is going to be our next major topic of the day. So, well, there we go. What is intuitive eating? So just to give you kind of a brief definition of what it means, intuitive eating is a personal process of honoring health by listening to the direct messages of the body in order to meet your physical and psychological needs. So I think that last part is really important because it's not just your physical needs sometimes. Sometimes it is your psychological needs. So sometimes you are eating to meet certain emotional needs, right? That's absolutely okay. That's real, that's justified, and that is definitely part of intuitive eating, as long as you're aware of the reason why you're doing it and why you're eating. And if you're aware and in the moment and listening to your body, and that's what it's telling you to eat, then that's absolutely justified. So the image on the right there, it tells you that you should listen to your body because it is, in most cases, smarter than you are. It knows what it needs, it knows what it wants, and if you really tune in to what your body is telling you, then you can become a very intuitive eater. But it is certainly not easy. It's a long and sometimes difficult process to become more intuitive with your eating. So we're going to go over today some of the steps that you can take in order to help achieve this idea of intuitive eating. So before we do that, I do want to point out that today, Wednesday, March 6th, actually is International No Diet Day. And I'll tell you that before, when I booked this webinar for today with this topic, I actually hadn't put it together that today was International No Diet Day. And I only realized today, actually, when one of my other dietitian friends shared the fact that it was International No Diet Day on her Instagram. So I thought this was a really great thing because it's a great coincidence that we're talking about intuitive eating on International No Diet Day, because intuitive eating really is the exact opposite of dieting. So that's just really great that we're talking about it today, because I'm going to talk about a lot of reasons why we shouldn't be dieting and why intuitive eating is a better way of going about eating and finding a healthy balance. So there we go. So back to intuitive eating. Just a little summary here of what it is and what we're going to be talking about. It essentially will teach you how to create a healthy relationship with your food, with your mind, and with your body. So it's kind of a holistic view of eating and of food. It includes the process of making peace with food and learning to respond to your inner body cues for hunger and satiety. And we're going to talk more about all of these things in detail, but basically it's just really important to note that intuitive eating is the complete opposite of a traditional diet. It does not impose rules or guidelines about what to eat or when to eat, but instead teaches that you are the one that should make those choices, and only you know what is best for your body, okay? I just see we've got a couple more comments here. So is today an official cheat day? No, I would not call it a cheat day, because the entire concept of a cheat day is rooted in the idea of a diet. So if we're not trying to diet and we're trying to eat intuitively, then there really should be no cheat days, because you should be able to eat what you want when you want, regardless of what day it is. So it would not be necessarily a cheat day. And let's see, we have another comment here. I think what I find difficult about intuitive eating is alternate factors such as stress, meditation, and sleep can heavily affect how my stomach feels. Even not eating enough can make me nauseous. I have a sensitive stomach. Yeah, so absolutely. That's a really great point. And of course, it's so personal. What we eat and how we eat is very personal. So this is a more general presentation. Of course, as a dietitian, if I were, seeing a certain person as a patient, then we'd be able to talk more in depth about those things and how a certain person's body reacts to those things like stress and medication and sleep. In this case, we're kind of glossing over the key concepts, but you're right, it absolutely can become really a little more confusing and more messy when you start to throw in those things, and it can be a bit of a murky water to navigate all at once. So we're really just kind of focusing on a starting point right now with intuitive eating and what it is and what it means and how you can start more thinking that way. But you're right, there are times that it does become more difficult, and that can be a little bit more difficult to navigate. So great point, and hopefully we'll give you a little bit more information about how you can start on the journey of intuitive eating if it's something you're interested in doing. And please let me know if you have any more questions about that, Ariel, as we go forward. I really appreciate you bringing that up. That's great. Okay, so this, I love this little photo. She's a pretty cute little baby here. And I just want to point out that every one of us was born with the ability to eat intuitively. So we were all born with the wisdom that we need to know what we want to eat and when to eat and how much to eat and all of that. So knowing when you're hungry, knowing when you're full, knowing what your food preferences are, and knowing how your body feels after making these food choices, these are all things that babies know instinctively, right? We see them crying when they're hungry. We see them refusing the spoon when they're full. They don't want to eat. They stop eating. And this is a really interesting occurrence, because if babies are so good at it, why does it then become so difficult for us, once we're adults, to go back to those fundamental principles and eat intuitively? So a lot of the time people say when they're talking about intuitive eating that it comes down to this simple fact of eating when you're hungry and stopping when you're full. And again, babies, they're great at this, right? If they're hungry, you can bet they're going to eat, maybe not exactly what you're asking them to eat, but they're going to want to eat something, right, in order to nourish their bodies and feel full. And once they do feel full, they will stop. But unfortunately, this inner wisdom that babies have is often clouded for us as adults by years and years of dieting and food myths and the diet industry. So it may sound like common sense, and it is for a baby, but when you have a history of chronic dieting, or even just a history of being aware of what dieting is and being told about other people's diets and learning to ignore your own inner hunger and fullness cues, or even just following, these rigid, healthy eating rules, it can be really difficult to then overcome all of those thoughts and eat more intuitively and go back to the basics like a baby is born with. So hopefully these slides today will help you to kind of regain some of that knowledge and wisdom. And the journey of intuitive eating is really just meant to help us to relearn those inner body cues and, I guess, become more like babies, which is a bit of a weird thought, but it is kind of the ultimate goal, is to be able to listen to our bodies the way that we could when we were born. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, and just to reiterate some of the points that I made about diet and diet culture. So essentially, dieting for weight loss has been proven to be overall quite ineffective, and sometimes in certain cases can actually lead to weight gain. So if we look at the cycle there on the right, at the top we have you're starting a new diet, right? So you pick a diet, whatever it may be, and you've decided you're going to stick to it and give it a try and hope to lose weight. So that often leads to restriction, because the fundamental principle of most diets in the diet culture are that you're either restricting how much you eat, which types of foods you eat, or when you eat. So there's some form of restriction going on there, which ultimately will lead to a feeling of deprivation, because you're depriving yourself of something, whatever it may be. That will then lead to cravings of certain foods, or of eating at certain times, or eating certain food groups. And typically, individuals find that they give in to that craving because our bodies are not meant to restrict entire food groups or foods that we enjoy. So ultimately, you will probably find that you will go and have that food because you're craving it. And then that leads to guilt, because then you've said, oh, now I've failed my diet. I'm a failure. I feel super guilty. I haven't succeeded. So now I have to start again and try a new diet that's going to be better for me and I can succeed at. So unfortunately, this is a really, really damaging cycle, both physically and psychologically, right? It can be really hard on us mentally, and it's really not good for us to go through this cycle. The point there that I made about how it sometimes leads to weight gain, that actually results in what we call yo-yo dieting or yo-yo weight loss. So you find you lose a little bit of weight when you start the diet, and then you gain it all back, if not more, by the time that you've essentially failed the diet. I put failed in quotes there because, of course, it's really the diet that's failing us, not us failing the diet, because no diet is really meant to succeed. It's just meant to make money for the most part. So the focus on diets and weight loss leads to body dissatisfaction and weight stigma, which can negatively impact health. So really, if dieting actually worked, I would think more of us would have reached our weight loss goals, and we wouldn't have the levels of overweight and obesity that we do have in the world. So unfortunately, dieting is just really not an effective way to reach certain health goals. And the reason that so many people are left feeling frustrated and confused after attempting a diet is that dieting really ultimately does not work, especially in the long run. So you may say, oh, well, I've lost X amount of pounds and I've been doing this diet for maybe a year or 2 years or even 5 years. That's great. And a lot of people have those experiences, but usually you spread that out to maybe 10 plus years and they're right back to where they started and they're not able to sustain that diet. There's very few cases where people are actually able to sustain a weight loss diet. Okay, rant over on that. So moving on to intuitive eating. So these are going to be the 10 basic principles of intuitive eating. So the concept or the term intuitive eating was coined by two female dietitians, Evelyn and Elise. And these ladies coined the term, I believe, in the mid-1990s, late 1990s, around there. And they came up with this book, Intuitive Eating, a revolutionary program that works. And in this book, it outlines the 10 main principles of intuitive eating and how we can try to become intuitive eaters. So if after the end of this presentation, you are interested and want to learn more about intuitive eating, I'd recommend you start with this book in particular. There's lots of other books on intuitive eating, but this is the one by the people that actually coined the entire term and concept. So it would be a really great one to start with, because there may be ones out there that are written not by the experts themselves. So this is a really great one to kind of get the general idea of what it is. Okay, so let's get started on the 10 principles. Number 1 is, of course, to reject the diet mentality. So bringing back in exactly what I was just talking about 2 slides ago, we have spent so much time trusting diet books and experts on diets about what and when and how you can eat, and that can unfortunately lead you away from trusting your body and its intuition. I see a question here, what are these 10 things of? I'll just move back here. So these are the 10 principles of intuitive eating, okay? So these are the 10 principles outlined in this book, and each one is sort of just a basic foundational principle of how we should go about intuitive eating, okay? Perfect. Glad we could clear that up there. Okay, so number 1, like I said, reject the diet mentality. So we want to start ignoring diets that offer false hope of quick, easy, permanent weight loss. We want to get angry at all of the lies that we've been fed that make you to feel that you failed every time that you've started a new diet and gained all the weight back. We want to just completely reject all of that and acknowledge the fact that diets are not designed to work, they're not particularly effective, and that food is good and necessary and we need to eat, and there's nothing wrong with eating a certain way, and we just need to learn to accept that. Okay, so that's really the essence of number 1. We want to just ignore all of the diets and diet culture that are out there and just learn to eat how we were meant to and listen to our bodies. Number 2, honor your hunger. So it's really important to acknowledge that hunger is not your enemy, right? So being hungry is a natural phenomenon. It's required, and it's really important to learn to respond to those early signs of hunger by nourishing your body. We don't want to ignore these signs because that's often what people end up doing in fad diets. They tend to ignore their hunger signs because the diet is telling them that they shouldn't be eating a certain thing or they shouldn't be eating at a certain time, and they learn to be really good at ignoring their feelings of hunger. But it's so important to provide your body with nourishment when it's feeling hungry. So we want to keep our body fed with an adequate amount of energy and carbohydrates and micronutrients so that we can stay healthy and happy. So if you do become hungry, if you do become too hungry, like if you start to feel that real grumble, starvation beginnings type of feeling, then you can actually trigger the sort of primal drive to overeat. Because when you're at that point of hunger, you might find that all of a sudden you're eating way more than you probably would have if you had eaten when you were just starting to feel a little bit hungry. So learning to honor those hunger signals really sets the stage for rebuilding trust with yourself and trust with food. And I see we have one more comment here. My brain is part of my body and it often wants jalapeno Cheetos. Yes, absolutely. And that's okay. We're going to talk a little bit more about that coming up here. So I like that you made that point. But definitely, just to make a blanket statement, there's not anything wrong with wanting Cheetos, right? At certain times, that's a perfectly okay snack. It's all about everything in moderation, listening to what your body wants. And I would like to bet you, Ariel, hopefully I'm saying that right, that if you ate Cheetos every day, 24/7, didn't eat anything else or hardly ate much else, your body would really start to hate Cheetos. It would not be feeling very good. So it's always about moderation, right? If you know that you're allowed to have Cheetos when you want them, in whatever amount feels satisfied, then, okay, good, I'm glad I'm saying it correctly, then you would get pretty sick of them if you're eating them in too much. But if you're allowed to eat them in those small amounts to feel satisfied, then you're going to be following a fairly healthy diet because your body is going to know that it wants more of certain nutrients and nourishment. And every now and then it's going to want something that tastes good and perhaps isn't quite as nourishing, but it really tastes good and we enjoy it. So that's kind of the balance that we're striving to achieve. And we'll talk more about that coming up. Okay, so this one kind of we led into this one quite well with that last comment. Number 3 is to make peace with food. So it's important to give yourself what we call unconditional permission to eat. This is probably one of the hardest parts of intuitive eating, and it links in really well to your comment about Cheetos, sorry, not Cheerios, because the important thing to keep in mind is that there is no bad food, right? Just because a food perhaps is higher in sugar or fat or calories, whatever it may be, it does not mean that it's bad. All it means it has slightly less of the nutrients, maybe that a vegetable or a fruit has, but that doesn't make it bad. It just means it probably tastes pretty good, but it certainly doesn't make it bad. Food really has no moral value. Food is not innately good or bad. It's just food. It tastes good. We like it. It nourishes us. It gives us energy of some kind. Whether it has more or less of the micronutrients, that's kind of irrelevant. It's still food. So you should really never feel guilty about eating any type of food, and we should feel at peace with our food decisions, no matter what those food decisions are. So it's important if you tell yourself that you can't or you shouldn't have a particular food. For example, this looks like a cookie that has a peace sign on it, which I thought was quite fitting for this slide. And so if you have it in your head that that's a bad food and you shouldn't be eating it, it can lead to really intense feelings of deprivation, like I said before, that then build into uncontrollable cravings and then often lead to binging. So then we end up eating more of that food than we probably initially would have if we had have just had a bite or two when we originally had that craving. But if we restrict and put it off, then that's when it leads to us probably eating more than we maybe should. and probably not feeling so great after. We also find that that leads to the feelings of guilt, but like I said, it's not bad. We shouldn't feel guilty for eating a certain food unless maybe you stole that food from a child or something, right? Like there's really no moral value in food unless you're stealing it. That's about it. So it's particularly important to make sure that we don't feel guilty about eating any type of food, whatever it may be. This is also quite important during quarantine. So during this crazy worldwide pandemic, we're all probably struggling a little bit and finding difficulties with our everyday life. And we may find that we need to eat certain comfort foods sometimes, and that's okay. That's perfectly okay. It's reasonable, it makes sense, and it probably is helping to contribute to your overall health, in this case, possibly mental health. So that's also a really important factor. And we have one more comment here. I get cravings, I think, based on being low on a nutrient or mineral. Sometimes I will crave sugar and other times salt. Really great point. That's very interesting. And that can definitely happen. Sometimes I'll even find I'm craving some fresh carrots, right? And maybe that's my body telling me that I'm low in whatever nutrient I'm getting from those carrots, right? So it's absolutely possible that your body is giving you hints on what it needs by telling you what it wants through those cravings. So some people find that they're more sensitive to that, others not. But that's really interesting that you do have such a variance in your cravings. So that could be definitely what's going on. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Number 4, challenge the food police. So the food police is really just a made up phenomenon. It doesn't actually exist, but in so many of our diets and the diet industry, really, like you can probably imagine what I mean when I say the food police. It's basically just any diet. It's this imaginary thing that's telling us what you can eat and what you can't eat, and what's bad and what's good. So we want to learn to just say no to all of those thoughts and just completely ignore them. So the food police is probably declaring that you're good for eating a certain food or you're bad for eating another. But again, just remember, food has no moral value. We're not stealing our food from little children, so you're not bad or good for eating a certain food. The food police also monitor the unreasonable diet rules that the diet industry has created. So we just want to ignore these thoughts completely because we know that the diet industry has created all of their diets to make money, not really for your health. And so we shouldn't be listening to what they have to say. Okay, one more question here. What about how you seldom have cravings for vegetables and you get more cravings for bread, cheese, meat, etc.? Yeah, that's a good point. I would say, I mean, it depends on the person. I honestly do. I do get cravings for vegetables. I've been practicing intuitive eating for quite some time though, so it's possible that that is part of it, and I've learned more to how to tune into what my body really does need. And for someone who perhaps isn't quite as practiced in intuitive eating, it may just be that you're craving foods that taste good, right? So bread or cheese or meat, maybe those foods are ones that you really enjoy. Another factor is likely that our primal needs, so our cravings often come from those primal needs, and often we're looking for high energy, high calorie foods because we have that primal desire to just get as many calories as we can, as quick as we can, because the way that we were many, many years ago was that, food wasn't always available all of the time like it is now. So when those high calorie foods are available, we just want to eat them to kind of pack them in for later so that we have enough calories to get through the rest of the day or whatever. So that's kind of another factor that could be playing in there. Having, the high carbohydrate breads or high fat cheeses or whatever it may be, that can be another factor. Whereas micronutrients are needed in much lower amounts. So fruit and vegetables are giving you those micronutrients, but it may be less likely that you're craving them in super large amounts, because if you eat just a few, then you're probably getting your fix of micronutrients for the day. So that is kind of my thoughts on that. Hopefully that answers that question. And we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, number 5, respect your fullness. So I found this little cartoon. That's Dory on the cartoon, for those of you maybe that don't have children. So Dory from Finding Nemo has, I think, short-term memory loss, I believe. And so she's saying, I'm so full, I couldn't eat another bite. And then all of a sudden, 2 seconds later, she sees food and, oh, look, food. And she's probably going to eat the food because she kind of forgot that she was full literally 2 seconds ago. But I suspect that we've all probably been Dory in this case sometimes, right? If you eat a big meal and you feel really full, and then all of a sudden someone comes out with cake for dessert and you didn't really know that you were having cake, so you didn't save room, but it looks really good, so you're going to have a piece of cake and kind of stuff it in, and then maybe you feel even worse by the time that that you eat and finish that cake. So it's important that we listen for the body signals that are telling us that we're no longer hungry and observing the signs that show us that you're comfortably full. So it's a really important process to try to learn those signals and learn how we feel when we're hungry and when we're full. I see someone says that they feel like they mix up their body signals for water for hunger, so they end up like that. That's definitely a really important one. Sometimes thirst and hunger can be confused. So sometimes people do say, if you feel hungry, try drinking a glass of water first, and then if you're still hungry, then have a snack. I don't particularly, I agree with that on some respects, but you also have to be careful because oftentimes that does get tied in with the diet mentality. So it's a way of saying that you should drink water so that you don't end up eating, so that you don't gain weight, kind of. That's like the foundation of that sometimes. So as long as you're not looking at it from that perspective and you're just looking at it from, maybe my body needs hydration, so we're going to try that. And then if your body still says, no, I'm hungry, then you say, okay, that now I know for sure that my body needs food, and now I'm going to give my body food. So if you're looking at it that way, definitely that's a great idea. Just make sure you're not looking at it as a way to hope to get rid of those hunger signals so that you won't have to eat. Because if you are hungry, you should eat, full stop. And then I have one more comment here from Brian. My issue is that I eat too fast to register fullness, trying to stop that. That's also a really common problem that people have. And one of the aspects of intuitive eating is to eat a little bit slower and sometimes pause in the middle of your snack or your meal and really reflect on how you're feeling. And it does take a little bit, a different amount of time for different people for how quick they start to feel full, but it can take probably up to 15 or 20 minutes for some people for them to really register that they're feeling full. So then they may overeat and all of a sudden feel more full than they intended to be. So the best way to get around that is just to slow it down a little bit, enjoy your meal, be social while you eat, have a conversation with your family, and pause a couple times throughout to really reflect on how your stomach is feeling and whether or not you've eaten enough and whether or not you should stop. Let's see what else I have here. So the other aspect of this is to be okay with leaving food on your plate, even just one bite, right? So I definitely had this growing up, and I'm sure many of you have had parents who have told you, you have to finish your plate. There's starving kids in Africa who would love to have that plate, right? So you've got to finish it. That's actually a really harmful mentality, and I've since learned that I will never say that to my kids when I do have children. Because it's okay to leave a few bites on your plate. If you feel full and you've got a few bites left, there's really no reason to stuff those bites in. I will often actually leave literally one bite on my plate because I find that at that point, I'm just full. I don't want that other bite. It doesn't seem appetizing, and I'll leave it on my plate. My sister actually makes fun of me all the time when I'm over at her house, and I do that. She thinks I'm weird, but I think it's a good sign of intuitive eating because I know that at that point, that's the exact point where I feel that I've had enough and I'm not going to put myself past that point of fullness. Really, serving sizes, whether it's at home or at a restaurant, they're really just arbitrary guesses on how much a person will eat. So there's no reason to eat what's on your plate. Someone's just, whether it's you or someone else, they've just put that amount on the plate as a guess for how much you'll eat. Maybe you'll eat more, maybe you'll go up for seconds, or maybe you'll eat less. Either way, perfectly fine. You should be listening to your body and respecting that feeling of fullness. So we're going to look here before moving on to number 6. I just have the 10-point hunger scale that I want to go over quickly with you. And this is a really great tool to use when you're trying to learn how you are when you're hungry and full. So it's really simple. It's a 10-point scale. Number 1 is starving, which obviously we really never want to be starving. 5 and 6 in the middle is feeling satisfied. So that's usually when you're just completely unaware of your hunger or your satiety. You don't feel full, you don't feel hungry. So that's kind of like that middle of the day, perfect balance when you've, had lunch, you're a couple hours past lunch and you feel fine. And that's when you're feeling satisfied. And then number 10, eating until you feel sick. So maybe your stomach feels really stretched out. You feel like you can barely walk. You don't want to stand up. That's a sign that you've eaten quite a bit too much. So it's important to learn the body's signals for how we feel at each of these stages. Everyone will be a little bit different. And intuitive eaters aim to keep themselves, around that middle point. So, no lower than a 3 or a 4 and no higher than maybe a 7 or 8. And that's kind of the ideal zone to be in. We don't want to get too far to either side because that's a sign that we haven't really been listening to our body. So we either didn't eat when we started to feel hungry, or we ate too much and didn't respect our fullness cues. Okay, so that's a really great tool to use. Let's see. Amber, you've said, I hate leaving food on my plate because of my parents. So right off the bat, put half my plate into to-go box. Yes, that's a great strategy. So if you're at a restaurant, ask for a to-go box right away, and you can put half of it in the box, and then that way you won't even feel bad because it's not on your plate. You can do that at home too, or just put a smaller serving size on your plate. And you can always go up for seconds, but if you do have that mentality that you hate to leave food on the plate, then put less than what you think you'll eat, and you can always have more, but that way you don't feel the need to finish an entire plate if it's too much. So that's a really good strategy. Awesome. And then the other part of intuitive eating that may be a bit counterintuitive to people who are conditioned to the idea of restrictive dieting is that with intuitive eating, there is a place for every food on your plate. So again, just to reiterate, there's no food that's ever taboo, and there's no food that you can't have, okay? So really important to drive that point home. There's always room for any food that you want. It's all about listening to your body and allowing yourself that unconditional permission to eat. And you will find that when you eventually learn to give yourself true unconditional permission to eat, you will no longer feel the need to sit down and eat, a huge amount of a food that maybe is not as nutritious. All of a sudden, you'll find that maybe you'll have, 1 or 2 bites of chocolate or whatever it may be, and you feel really satisfied because you allowed yourself to have it as soon as the craving occurred, and you enjoyed it, you ate it intuitively, and now that craving has gone, and you know that the next time that it comes, you'll be able to have it again if you want it. So giving yourself that permission really actually ends up, in most cases, allowing you to eat less probably than you would have if you weren't giving yourself the permission, because then you just end up binging more than you probably should have in the first place. I'm just going to take 1 second here to pause. I'm noticing my laptop is getting close to dying, so I'm just going to plug it in here for 1 second. If you hold on for a moment. Okay, looks like that works. Wonderful. Okay, so we'll move on now from the hunger scale, and we'll talk about number 6. So number 6, the 6th principle of intuitive eating, is to discover the satisfaction factor. So here we have an adorable little boy eating his birthday cake. It looks like he just turned 1. And it's really important to try to enjoy our food as much as this little boy appears to be enjoying his birthday cake. Maybe we don't get it all over our face like he does, but we should definitely be enjoying it as much as he is. Eating should always be enjoyable. Really, the pleasure and the satisfaction that's found in the eating experience is probably one of the greatest gifts of our existence. I personally love food. I love to eat. I love to cook food because I just get so excited about what I'm going to be eating and how good it sounds and smells and all of that. So when you eat what you really, really want to eat, you'll find that you feel satisfied and you feel content. And by allowing yourself to have this experience, you enjoy every bite, and you'll find that it does, like I said before, it does take much less food for you to feel satisfied and to decide that you've had enough, because you know that you're going to be allowed more another time. Whereas if you are being restrictive and saying that having cake is bad, then when you do decide to break down and feel like you're breaking your diet by having cake, you're probably going to eat a bunch, because you're going to say, well, I'm breaking my diet right now. I'm just going to eat as much as I can, and tomorrow will be better, and then I won't ever eat it again. So you're telling yourself these lies. So you're probably going to end up eating way more than you would have if you had have just said, you know what, I'm going to have a tiny little sliver. I'm going to enjoy every bite. And then next time that I have cake, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to enjoy it in the amount that I want, in the amount to make me feel satisfied, but not in an amount that's, overindulgent. So that's really important. Okay. Number 7. So number 7 strays a little bit away from food, and we're talking now more about our emotions and feelings. I'll just pause here. I see we've got another comment. My brain also wants to keep eating the cake because it loves cake. Sure, and that's absolutely a fair point, and I hear ya, and I love cake too. It does take time to sort of learn when we've had enough, and I think that could be linked with this idea that cake is bad. For some people, I'm not sure about your particular situation, but if you feel that you need to keep eating cake because you love it, then that could be a sign that your brain is also somehow feeling like, oh, I really shouldn't be eating this, but I am, and I'm feeling bad about it, and yada, yada, yada. Whereas if you know that it's allowed and you're eating it to make you feel good, I'd be surprised if you didn't find that you had to eat less in order to feel satisfied. It depends on every person and their own individual experiences. But over time, I would bet that you probably will find that you need less. It's also important when you're eating cake or whatever food it may be to take a moment and reflect on how it's making your body feel, or how it makes your body feel afterwards, and really be in tune with that. If you eat a massive piece of cake, does your stomach feel really great after? Do you feel like you could get up and play with your kids or go for a walk? Or do you feel a bit, run down? Maybe you don't feel as energized as you would if you had have eaten something else after, or a smaller piece of cake and then something else that's more nutritious or light. So really being in tune with those feelings and allowing yourself to then eat based on those feelings. So maybe your brain is saying, keep eating the cake because it tastes so good, but you know deep down that your body's not going to feel as good if you eat double that amount of cake as if you only had one slice. So by knowing that, you can help eat more intuitively, because your brain is also having that logic to say, no, I'm probably not going to feel as great an hour from now if I have 3 pieces instead of just 1, or whatever it may be. So hopefully that helps clarify that a little bit. Okay. Moving on to number 7. So like I said, we're straying a little bit away from food and talking about our emotions and our feelings and how to honor those feelings without using food. So we talked at the beginning of this presentation about how many people do, eat for their emotions, but it's important to become aware of the feelings that cause you to eat, and then find ways to comfort and nurture and distract and resolve your issues without using food. So trying to do other things like go for a walk in the woods like this fellow is doing, and dealing with those emotions in a more productive way. Because, as much as it might feel good in the moment to have a certain food to deal with your emotions, it won't ultimately fix the problem, and it's usually just a temporary solution. So in the long term, it's better to find a more productive way to handle those feelings, rather than just distracting from the feeling by eating. That being said, of course, going back to some of these intuitive eating principles, it's important that we're still always giving ourselves the unconditional permission to eat. So if you decide that you need to have a certain food because you're feeling a certain way, that's still okay, as long as you're making that decision consciously and you're aware of the feeling and the food that you've decided to eat, and you're aware that that's how you've chosen to honor your feelings. But it's also important to know that there are other ways that you could honor those feelings, and you've weighed your options and you've evaluated all of the options and you've decided on a certain way. So in this case, you could do a walk or some yoga, or, hang out with your friends, whatever it is that will make you feel better. But of course, we still don't want to feel guilty if we do end up eating for an emotional reason. Just be aware that you ate for an emotional reason and kind of move on from that. That's fine. All right. Number 8, respect your body. So a huge part of intuitive eating is also having a healthy attitude towards your body image, not just a healthy attitude, but towards the food itself. So we need to learn to kind of accept our genetic blueprint and acknowledge how capable our bodies are as they are, and not try to fit them into this idea of health that's on all of our magazines and in diet culture and etc. So accepting our genetics is really important. And I like to kind of think about it like a shoe size, right? Someone who's a shoe size 8, let's say, wouldn't just weirdly try to expect to fit into a size 5 because it's just futile, and that's the size that your foot is. So same goes for the size of your body. It's important to really just accept your body for what it is, respect it for what it's capable of doing, and honor your health that way. It's never linked to weight loss. Intuitive eating is never having weight loss as a goal. So it's possible that someone will lose weight while following intuitive eating just by many of the factors that we've talked about: less binging, less feeling guilty, all of that. And also they're listening to their body, they're nourishing their body and eating certain types of foods. So they may find that they do lose weight over time. It's probably going to be a lot slower than it would be on a crazy fad diet, but it will be more long lasting. So it's perfectly acceptable that someone might lose weight, but also you might not. You might not change. You might not change at all, but what you will be doing is getting more healthy. And that's really, really what's important, is your health and how you feel and how your body feels. So that's the ultimate goal of intuitive eating, not so much weight loss. All right, number 9, exercise, feel the difference. So in this case, we're talking about exercise as a way to feel good about ourselves and about our body, rather than exercise as a calorie burning required thing that we must do. So try just getting active for fun and feel the difference between that and how it feels to get active because you feel like you have to. So focus on how you feel after the activity. For example, you might feel energized or strong or happy, rather than just feeling awful because you just did a crazy exercise that you didn't really want to do in the first place. And if you focus on those types of feelings, then you may find that you're feeling actually more motivated to continue doing it. So here we have a photo of a family dancing in the middle of their living room. That's actually a great form of exercise, but really it's just fun, right? So you're getting active, you're feeling great, you're having fun with your family, you're bonding, and that's a much better way to be doing exercise than feeling like you have to in order to burn X amount of calories or lose a certain amount of weight. Okay, and the last intuitive eating principle is honoring your health using gentle nutrition. So it's important to make food choices that honor your health and your taste buds while making you feel good or feeling healthy. So we all have, I think, hopefully, a basic knowledge of what is healthy food, right? I think here, like on the screen, for example, we have a bowl of berries. I think we would all agree that berries are generally a healthy food. So it's great that we all kind of have this general idea, and hopefully we can use this knowledge that we all generally have to eating most of the time. Ariel, I just saw that you said you have to go. No problem at all. Hope you enjoyed. Definitely would love to see you come back another time. And you can listen to the rest of this presentation another time as well once it's posted. Awesome. Okay. So remembering that you don't have to eat a perfect diet to be healthy, and you will not suddenly get nutrient deficiency or gain weight from only one snack or only one meal or one day of eating. So it's really more important to focus on what you eat consistently over time, again and again, day after day, that matters. And a one-off having cake for a birthday or whatever it may be is really not going to matter over time. Progress is what counts, not perfection, okay? So that's kind of the general idea behind this principle. Okay, so that's the end of the 10 principles for intuitive eating. I'll now just go over a little bit of what the evidence says in terms of intuitive eating and how it works. So studies have linked intuitive eating to a lower BMI overall, weight maintenance, not necessarily weight loss, but weight maintenance, improved psychological health or mental health, so less depression and anxiety, improved self-esteem, improved body image, and overall improved quality of life. So there are so many studies that show these, and we know that it is evidence-based, it is effective, and it does have many benefits. So definitely something worth trying. And just to go over, again, the key points of what intuitive eating is and how we should go about it. We want to rely on our internal hunger and satiety cues. Satiety just means fullness. Number 2, giving ourselves unconditional permission to eat. And number 3, being positive about our bodies and respecting our bodies. Those are the kind of 3 main points that you can take away from this presentation. Okay, before we conclude, I do have 2 more polls that I'd love for you all to answer for me. So number 1, I'd love to know if you feel that you can apply what you learned today in your daily living. So I've just made that poll live. If you wouldn't mind filling that out, that would be lovely. And again, it is anonymous, so we'll have no idea who you are if you're voting. Wonderful. And number 3, how satisfied are you with the Demio program? So Demio is the platform that we're using for this presentation here. And I'd love to know what you thought of it and if you thought it was effective for this presentation. So that would be great if you could answer that one as well. It's live now. Oh, Jessica, I see that you said strongly disagree, but you meant the opposite. That's totally fine. I'll make a note of that so that we know. Thanks for letting me know. Appreciate it. I'm glad you strongly agree. That's good to know. Okay. Perfect. So it looks like one person was dissatisfied. Hopefully you didn't have too many technical difficulties with it. If you did want to tell me in the chat or anything, then you can, if you feel comfortable sharing what those technical difficulties were. Oh, they picked the wrong one. Okay. You know what? It's funny because when they sent out these polls, they put them in that order. And so I just left them there. But as I was typing them in, I thought that it seemed a bit odd that they put disagree first. So next time I might actually switch those around because I agree it's a bit not an intuitive order, which is funny. Okay, perfect. So good to know. No one was extremely dissatisfied. That's good. Perfect. Okay. So last slide here is just some resources. They ask us to put this slide at the end of all of our webinars. So these are just some numbers and resources that you have access to as individuals who are affiliated with the Canadian Armed Forces. So if you want to check out any of these websites or you need help in a certain issue, there's lots of phone numbers that you can call that you always have access to 24/7 for the most part, I think. So you can take a photo of this slide if you do want to have that information before I move on to the final slide. So feel free to take a photo right now before I switch it if you want to remember some of these phone numbers. Okay, so that brings us to the end. I'm going to flip my camera back on here. If you have any final questions about anything we talked about today, then please let me know. Jessica, thank you so much. Yeah, no problem. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Okay, great. Well, that's it from me. So feel free to sign off. If you don't have any extra questions, I'll hang out here for a few moments. If you do have any final questions or want to share anything with me, I'll be here for a few moments. And I hope you have a great day. Thanks so much for joining me.